Not long ago, a new student, if you will, showed up on my doorstep, as the saying goes. They were someone who had not had a spiritual path before, and they were asking me for guidance. And so they asked me really two questions. One was, what's the journey like? And secondly, how does one apply these seen true principles of engaging, releasing, and transcending? Honestly, I was sort of blank at first, but then something my longtime spiritual mentor Sam told me happened, is that when the question gets asked, the spiritual universe provides an answer. So I breathed for a couple of moments, and then I knew how to reply. I told her, it's like we start in a swamp with muck up to our ankles, and it stinks, and it's difficult, it's a slog. And when we're in that swamp, dealing with our dark side, our shadow self, our unresolved conflicts, the things within us which are still consuming us, we need swamp guides, maybe more than one. People who know how to walk that swamp, who know how to lead us by the hand and help us. In addition to that, the sayings of White Eagle, something that came out of a British spiritualist group, says while we're slogging, we need to keep our eyes on the light. We need to remember in our heart, in our thoughts, somewhere, that there's a bright light we're headed towards, else the slog will come to no good. So both a swamp guide plus a vision, if you will, of where we're headed. There comes a moment when, with the swamp guide's help, we find ourselves on what some have called the broad highway. We're out of a lot of the muck, and we're sort of moving along pretty steadily, although it's still, it's really a trudge. There's still a lot of ground to be covered. Eventually, the broad highway brings us to the mountain, and it's such a great metaphor because now we're talking about ascension, about beginning to elevate, to gain altitude spiritually, psychologically, emotionally. And Alan Cohen, the author, talked about this mountain as being something that we go round and round and round, over and over again. And he acknowledges that lots of times when you come around and it's only a foot higher than you were, it doesn't look like you've made any progress. But then on the 13th circuit, you suddenly reach a vantage where you can see that in fact, you've made a lot of progress. Now the beauty of this metaphor, this analogy, is that each circuit around the mountain gets shorter and shorter and shorter. It takes less and less time as we gain elevation. It's during this time that we will discover that the path is being made with every step. It's why so many fixed formulas, fixed religions, fixed philosophies don't work, because your path, just like my path, is going to be unique to your needs. And with that, we get this extra uplift because we realize we're on our path. It wasn't preordained, it wasn't predestined. It's the path that's falling before us each and every step along the way, which is just beautiful. We also discover that we have to walk it for ourselves, but we don't have to do it alone. Thankfully, there are Sherpas along the way, our new spiritual teachers who will guide us up the mountain, because a swamp guide's not sufficient at that point. There comes a moment in the ascension where we get fairly high up, and with that, we realize a moment is coming where we get to cast ourselves onto the winds, the spiritual uplift. That's a beautiful moment when we realize that we don't need anything anymore. We're fully realized. Something magical has happened, and the wind begins to have its way with us. We're not in control, but we get to soar. And the mind, the thought that always comes to my mind at this point is the Jonathan Livingston Seagull, the story from the 1970s, Richard Bach, where Jonathan says, "I'm just a seagull that likes to fly," because that's ultimately where we're all bound. So if we reframe this, the swamp, that's kind of the engagement process where we deal with the difficult things that block us. The releasing part is the rising up on the mountain, where each level we release more, we rise up. And then transcendence is what happens when we're finally able to cast ourselves out upon the spiritual winds and fly where we need and want to go. It's a beautiful thing. It's a long journey. It's well worth it. But once you start flying, all the effort before it is worth it.